Hi everybody, my name is Eimear. I'm a landscape architect with the Transport Infrastructure Ireland, and today I want to talk about the design of streetscapes and how we can design out the need for pesticide use. First off, I'd just like to apologise that I can't be there in person, and I hope you're all having a great event. So, Transport Infrastructure Ireland have been a member of the steering committee for the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan right from its inception. In addition to the general plan, there's also a series of sector-specific guides, and we worked with Biodiversity Data Centre to develop a pollinator-friendly management of transport corridors. And one of the actions within that guide is to reduce the use of pesticides. Transport corridors, by their very nature, tend to have safety and operational requirements where vegetation management needs to align with kind of other operational requirements. But avoiding the need for pesticide use is one of the keys that we're hoping to achieve. As well as the pollinator plan, I just want to introduce you all to a new document that TII has just published this month called The Design and Delivery of Soft Landscape Treatments in Urban Transport Environments. This is a technical document where we're really looking to get the most value out of the softscape in our urban landscapes. It's part of a suite of documents. It's also accompanied by a guide for the implementation of soft landscape in towns and villages. And the aim of this is that it's a guidance to incorporate soft landscape treatments within the project delivery stages of TII transport projects. We also have a suite of planting details which are also to be published. So the reason that we developed this technical guidance document, is to inform the design approach for multifunctioning soft landscapes along TII urban transport corridors. And when we talk about soft landscapes, we're talking about trees and the canopy layer, hedges and the shrub layer, perennials, bulbs and verges and the field layer. And this document will apply to all of TII's transport corridors. So that includes Lewis Light Rail, public transport, active travel, greenways, and the towns and villages along our national roads within the 60 kph areas. And the kind of four core theories we're promoting is that landscape treatments are really important for place making and shaping on our streets. They have the opportunities to enrich place and its characteristics, and also to contribute towards communities' health and well-being. In terms of the pollinator plan, the transport specific guidance fits really neatly within the planet positive landscape treatments approach. And this is where we're looking at soft landscapes as climate resilient and having a sustainable soft landscape design, and also having biodiversity positive landscape design. So this suite of documents, as I say, they've just been published literally in the last couple of weeks, and they're available free to download at tiipublications.ie. So when do weeds or plants growing in streetscapes become an issue? Well, where they are concerned is where they potentially have an impact on the safety of the street for the users in terms of sight lines, in terms of changes to the quality of walking surfaces, where they impact on the function of the street, and this is where they would impact on drainage, accessibility, or the passage for the vehicles or people or cyclists, where they degrade the infrastructure of the street, and this might be through root damage or planting in masonry joints, making structures less stable. And also when they're invasive, where they have the opportunity to spread, and so where plants might move beyond the street into the wider environment. So where do plants grow in streetscapes? Well, they grow where they're planned and they grow where they're not planned. So if we want to prevent plants growing where they're not planned, we really need to think about the cause of plant growth on a particular surface or in a particular place, and how we can make the environment inhospitable for these plants to grow, so we get growth where we plan for growth. And really, a plant, there's no victim shaming here for weeds, because a plant will grow if it's given organic material to root, if it's given light and water. And these are the basic factors that will facilitate plant growth. So if we're looking at prevention by design, we need to think about streetscape design at the early concept stages, so that we can reduce the requirement for any needs for pesticides in the future. And this is that whenever there's the opportunity to influence the design of new streets, or where we're modifying existing ones, that we focus on incorporating design features and technical details which will minimize unwanted plant growth, but also promoting wanted plant growth. I have this image here of, I don't know if any of you have seen the new rain garden by Dublin City Council up in Arbour Hill, and this is a really good example of plants in a streetscape having multifunctional uses, from buffer to water to drainage, sustainable drainage to pollination, but it's plants that's designed for that specific place and that specific function. And when we talk about landscape, hard landscaping is an area where we really, by its design, don't particularly want plants growing. But plants will grow in paving joints in particular, where there's organic material in a blocked, say, paved surface. And the wider, the deeper, and the more numerous the joints, the greater the potential for soil to accumulate. And also the lighter the footfall, the greater the potential for soil accumulation. This is an example down by the quays, and you can see here that the plants are growing in joints in the block paved surface, and the wider the joints and the more numerous the joints, the greater the potential for soil accumulation. And the amount of soil that accumulates is really dictated by the construction detail, and it's generally no more than a few millimetres in paved areas will accumulate. But plants with very shallow roots will colonize these areas, and the plant here is the native pearlwort. So this is a native plant in an urban landscape. And you can see that where there are no footfall and wide joints and small paving units, you get more plant growth. Where you've no footfall, but you've larger paving units and narrower joints, you get much reduced planting. And then where you have heavy footfall with large paving units and narrow joints, you will get very little plant establishment. So recognizing that different type of hard landscape treatments can either facilitate or prevent growth is an important part of the design process. And more we're seeing that permeable paving is increasingly becoming a part of our tool in terms of streetscape design, especially when it comes to rainwater, rainwater and suds treatments, in areas such as bike parking, where you don't necessarily need to have a fully sealed surface. Permeable surface can be a more popular design decision. And going back to the reasons where plants cause issues on streetscape, this is a native plant. Does it impact on the safety for street users? It doesn't. Does it impact on the function of the street? It doesn't. It doesn't degrade the infrastructure of the street, and it's not invasive. It's actually a native. So in that kind of assessment, this isn't a weed. This is a plant that's growing that really is causing no issues, and it's as I said, a native plant. And positive design decisions can be applied to have use of this kind of design approach and this kind of plant establishment in our urban areas. This is a sculpture of Miffy in Utrecht, where wider, deeper joints were used in the setting of the sculpture, which creates a setting, and it also has a protective value in that it's maybe not part of the main circulation routes. So positive design decisions can incorporate planting in areas that maybe traditionally they would have been there would have been a need to spray them and to remove the plant growth. And really, we need to think about, does the plant growth impact on the function of the streetscape element? Is a street still usable even though there are plants growing underneath it? You would say yes. Is the sign still accessible? Another issue in streetscape design is poor workmanship, really, and where there's awkward connections between surfaces and paving failures, where there are different retrofits into streets at different times, so different phases of the works aren't necessarily aligned. They really need to be complementary in terms of finishes, materials, and snagging, so that we can design out awkward corners and joints where again you'll get an accumulation of silt. Repairs to surface are a big issue, where different utility providers come in and leave the streetscape in an uneven finish, where again you get accumulation of silt. So again, by this, the quality of the surfacing means that we won't get the accumulation of silt, which allows for plant growth. Designing curbs with wide radiuses rather than sharp corners, so that or drainage can wash away the silt accumulation. So really, for streetscape works, the devil really is in the detail, and a good finish to a streetscape will reduce the opportunities for plant growth. Drainage design is also another key issue. Falls and surfacing play a major issue in silt accumulation. And, silt accumulation causes major issues in below ground drainage infrastructure in terms of silt traps and clogging up the infrastructure that's hidden beneath the road. So how our drains are designed and how they fit within the streetscape is critical. Sometimes you just think if we could bring back the road sweeper and just sweep away this grit before it accumulates or before it settles in corners or before it goes into our underground system and then eventually, unfortunately out into our water courses. So, and drainage plant can be such a positive element in street drainage. Again, I'm going to look at this image of Arbor Hill, which I think is just such a lovely scheme. The lady there in the coat was walking past as I was literally down on my hands and knees taking a picture of the bee and the lupin. And she was saying that she used to hate walking down that street because she's unsteady on her feet and she felt it was very busy. Pavement was uneven. But she just said it's been transformed and now it's her favourite part of her daily walk. So, planting as a positive element in the streetscape has a real impact on people's everyday lives. And, the reallocation of space within our towns and villages does create areas where potentially there are more hard surfaces and more areas where there is the potential for planting to happen. This is an example of a recent scheme where we're doing just at a sketch stage, where you can see that rather than just pave the areas that are being reclaimed back from the carriageway, we look at opportunities to plant them. And again, this is all the positive connotations in terms of community health, in terms of pollinators. And the existing situation is over wide carriageways, but the proposal just to hard surface it really is missing some tricks that if we plant up these areas, we can do so much more in terms of the functionality of the street with the soft landscape that's applied. And prevention by design, the edge between hard and soft landscape is an area that we find there can be a temptation to use pesticides to stop the encroachment of soil and vegetation into the usable width of transport corridors. This is the Portmarnock Greenway, where there is a very clear delineation between the materials to allow you to see the soil creep, and it can be addressed before it impacts on the functional or usable width of the footpath and cycle path. So robust path edgings with simple, well thought out methods of maintaining those using mechanical means should be part of the maintenance strategy for these types of pieces of infrastructure. And one of the issues also is that the more fertile the soils, the more aggressive the grass seed used, the bigger an issue this can be, because it is just strips of energy, of nutrients, and really robust planting that's just waiting to encroach. So low fertility soils and native regeneration is a much preferred option in these kind of forage areas. And the use of low fertility soil types, it's covered in the design and delivery document I talked about, because providing high levels of fertility to soils has traditionally influenced soil composition with deeper soil depths in urban areas. And this approach, sought to grow nutrient hungry specimen plants and give them, a great burst of nutrients. But deep soil and high soil fertility in streetscape, soft landscape areas can cause issues. It can lead to an increase in weed species. It can result in resource depletion, where you're taking topsoil from a good area and bringing it into an urban area, and it has increased maintenance costs. Highways England have done a lot of work in this in terms of low nutrient forages, and they have, again, we've referenced their document in the design and delivery document, and they've some interesting research on the use of low nutrient forages as part of their biodiversity strategy, which we're incorporating into our strategy. And the greater the depth of soil available to a plant, the greater chance of allowing deeper rooted perennials to establish themselves. Dock is a really deep rooted plant, And once they get established, it's far more difficult to remove them once established. So shallower, less nutrient-rich soils will generally only sustain annual plants, which are easier to control. The image on the left there is from Dutch University. The link is there at the bottom. That I'd encourage you all to look at. It's an amazing collection of images of the above and below ground growth of a lot of our common species, and it's just a real insight into the functioning of soil and the functioning of roots, and just this world that's hidden beneath our feet. Um, this is nettles. You can see they also have a deeper root, but it could be that while nettles have a value for biodiversity, are they wanted in areas of high pedestrian traffic? And again, it's an indicator of fertile soil. So low fertility soils will be able to inhabit its establishment. The suite of standard documents, planting documents and planting details includes low fertility soil and a sterile mulch. And mulch is another element that's really an important part in terms of weed control. Sterile mulches can be used to reduce weeds establishing because they're generally composed of layers of sand or gravel, 50 to 150 mil thick. And their presence on the top of the soil means that it'll limit a weed's ability to grow, and it also helps retain water. But it traditionally has been seen as nearly a top dressing or just a visual element, but it's more and more being appreciated as having a really important impact on the future maintenance perspective over the longer term. And again, this is an example we have in the overarching technical document, which is the Great Green Scheme in Sheffield, where sand was used as a sterile mulch. The 50mm mulch really has multiple functions. It absorbs energy from the runoff. The rain gardens have numerous inlets. So as the runoff comes off the street, the numerous outlets and the mulch allow the silt and sediment to be deposited along the road length, so you're reducing the likelihood of having nutrient-rich localized depositions. And the mulch also creates a weed-free surface to allow the plants to establish. So in this scheme, the mulch was applied and then plants were planted into the 50mm aggregate, but their roots were encouraged to establish into the substrate below that. And this aggregate mulch cuts down on the need for weeding, but there's also there can be some weed invasion from wind-blown seeds in the early stages, but this is short term until the full planting established. And you can see here after a couple of years that when the planting has established, there's actually very little of the mulch even visible. So there's very little opportunity for plants that aren't designed for this space to be incorporated. Also because it's quite a naturalistic form of planting. The odd unwanted plant isn't going to have much of an impact on the function of this planting unless it becomes aggressive and takes over. So every 5 years or so, there would tend to need to be an edit done on this type of planting just to make sure that there are no unwanted species that are dominating. This is an example in Ireland. This is the Liffey Valley car park, where again mulch has been used quite successfully. I was out there for the first time in a long time, and this, not unexpectedly, is planting in the yellow car park. So it's quite a clever use of planting mulches and colour to create a more attractive interchange at the bus and car parking areas. This is another example of mulch being used in a traffic island, and this is in Utrecht. And you can see where the material used in the crossing is small bricks, which are small units which have more jointing, which allows for the possibility of plant establishment. But that's the character of the town. It's a site-specific place-making material that's used that's really appropriate for this context. So while there is a certain amount of plant growth in the joints, there's a limited amount. The mulch helps with that, and it also has it still retains a very wide usable width for the volume of pedestrians. Plant typologies then is another issue, that we can minimise soil being colonised by other plants by being very careful in the plants we choose to establish in an area. Pollinator friendly planting, ground cover planting in small areas such as traffic islands will quickly cover the ground, and they will prevent other plants from colonising. I'm also, in my spare time, I'm a adjudicator in the Tidy Towns competition. I'm just going to be heading out in the next couple of weekends to judge. And this is from a village I did a couple of years ago. And I thought it was interesting that the range of community expectations in terms of planting and in terms of weeding can be seen. You had the bottom corner with the red roses is at highlighting a junction, so it is a real function in terms of directing people to crossings. It's bright and eye-catching. The image around the bus shelter shows a based oxide daisy and much more naturalistic form of planting, which creates a place around the bus shelter. And the verge on the right hand side was one where it was a grass verge that had been mown, and they were letting it grow and cutting it once a year. And, whereas a couple of years ago we might have said, points deducted, it looks messy. Now the appreciation that this is a much more biodiverse way of managing green areas in our streetscape. I mean, the only thing I would have probably said here is that the accumulation of the cuttings is potentially reducing the usable width. But again, it's the visual kind of evidence that the changing in our perception of what is a neat planted area and what is not a neat planted area. And this is an area where it's, the type of planting really doesn't make that much of a difference. It functions as a soft landscape area. And there is still, a value in having ornamental or mixes within our road corridors that are eye-catching and add value. This is a wilder, if you like, planted area in Dublin where it's been applied to a large verge area, and it does give a great splash of colour. It will, in time, tend to be colonised by native plants, but it will be likely to retain some of their showiness. And this is in stark contrast to what is being pushed as wildflower meadows. There's no way that this is at all being seen as being a native planting area. It's a horticultural visual amenity element, if you like, but it does have its values. And again, I tend to be on my hands and knees taking photographs of insects at the oddest time, but this and that day when I took the photograph beforehand, there was a range of biodiversity within these planted areas. Once they're contained and once they're within the right place and once they don't expand beyond the corridor that they're in, there is a value for these kind of planted areas. And I suppose this area is beside a school, so it in the winter it just looked amazing with all the seed heads. It's then cut right back at the end of the winter. So there's a value in its full cycle of growth, decay, and regrowth being evident to school kids who pass it every day on their way to school. The other issue in terms of prevention by design is using local seed to rejuvenate, and so that rather than bringing in highly competitive grasses, that you can let the local seed rejuvenate. This is an area along the national road where cuckoo flowers and sedges are re-establishing. So it just looked amazing. It has value for wildlife. It functions as it needs to, and it's benefited from not having very fertile soil and a non-native seed mix being applied to it. So I suppose the solution to some of these areas? I mean, one of the key problems in terms of weed growth and pesticide use is areas where there's low footfall, where there's basically too much hard surfacing and where plants are establishing where we don't want them to establish. But in reality, the best choice for these areas may well be just to revert them to planting. So where there are large areas of cobblelock and shaded areas with low footfalls, they will become filled with silt and they will become vegetated. Also where there's areas where there's overwide footpaths or where there's shading from adjacent vegetation, these areas will tend to become greened up because they aren't required this excessive width. So, there are solutions to these in terms of design that, if we take these areas and we convert them to planting and reduce the area of cobblelock, so you will reduce the area of silt accumulation, plant the shaded areas with, shade-loving plants, use a mulch made from the materials that are lifted, the cobble lock, remove clutter, and highlight the historic features. So rather than an area that's a problem area, you turn it into a place. Go to my next one, and again going back to the core values of how we design a place and how we design a plant positive place. It's a matter of, as I said at the start of the presentation, making sure that we have a clear design philosophy when we're starting on projects, that we have the best technical advice, that we think about where we want plants to be and where we don't want plants to be, and we understand the value of soft landscaping for biodiversity, for community, for all of the items that we talked about before. Having a well thought out strategy is half the battle when it comes to future maintenance. So again, I just highlight the documents and the website there on TII Publications if any of you would like to download those documents. And I'd just like to say thank you for your time. I have my email address there, as I'm not there in person. If anybody has any questions or any queries, I'd be more than happy to for you to contact me. So I say thank you, and I hope you have a lovely session. Thank you.